Human advancement can be measured in technological progress. Since the start of the digital economy, we've been creating the right conditions for innovation to thrive and deliver positive change. By creating policy, regulatory and legal frameworks that keep things stable, predictable, fair and scalable. And these pathways we create drive economic growth and build better societies. Behind the breakthroughs and ahead of the curve, Access Partnership is playing a critical role in a critical space at a critical time.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our AI for Sustainability webinar discussing innovation for net zero and nature positive. This webinar will explore how AI will help us in solving our climate and biodiversity challenges. I'm Melissa Govender, and I lead Access Partnership's AI Policy Lab. We created this lab earlier this year to have a dedicated space where honest and difficult discussions around AI can take place. To date, we've discussed AI and ethics, copyright, healthcare, as well as the recent AI Safety Summit that took place earlier this month in the UK. We have several AI alerts, a newsletter, and thought leadership pieces, as well as a podcast. In fact, our interview with Lord Holmes from the UK's House of Lords has over 6,000 views, and you can check out the links in the chat. The connection between AI and the environment really stands out for a couple of crucial reasons. Firstly, technology plays an important role in greening our global economy. For example, if we think of manufacturing, can technology be used to enhance productivity? Can AI help us with using energy more efficiently? Is there a more eco-friendly way to collect and store data? Where do the biggest risks and opportunities lie? And how can we unlock the incredible value that AI within the sustainability sector can provide? Our goal today is to deep dive into this topic. The insights we gather will inform our collaborations and our thinking. Please allow me to introduce the moderator of today's webinar, Shivan Kohli. Shivan leads Access Partnership's global sustainability work and is a senior manager with our economic strategy team. Shivan is an expert economist, and he's worked on a variety of topics in this space, including tech and sustainability, the future of business and biodiversity, agri-food sustainability, and supply chains. Shivan, over to you.
Thanks, Mel, and welcome again to everyone tuning in. This session is streaming live on our channels on YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. All throughout the session, please keep all of your questions coming in. We want to keep our panelists on their toes, of course, and I'm sure they're going to do a fantastic job. To our community of partners, clients, alumni, friends, welcome back. And to our new joiners, thank you for your time today. We have a very good mix of people in today's session. About a quarter of you come from the tech sector, 40% more broadly from the private sector, about 15% from government, and about 20% from civil society, academia, and media. And thank you all for your interest in AI and its intersection with sustainability. Mel covered it really well. There's a few things going on in this equation. First, you have, the rapid acceleration of AI in our lives in recent months for largely good, some worrying reasons. You add the existential threat of climate change and biodiversity loss, and add the fact that the COP28 climate conference in a few days away is in a bit of a disarray, means that there's really no better time to talk about this. And it actually appears that a lot of you are somewhat AI fluent. I think according to our recent poll on LinkedIn, we learned that about 51% of you rank yourselves as intermediate when it comes to AI, which means that you understand it conceptually and can apply it to a few areas of your work. About a quarter of you rank yourselves as with a basic understanding of AI, and about 17% with an advanced understanding of it. Thank you to all of you on this webinar who have voted on that poll. If you haven't yet, feel free to pop over to our LinkedIn page and contribute your thoughts. There's another poll on public-private partnerships that we're also going to feature results from at the end of this session. Now, over to today's discussion. We'll be covering about 4 or 5 topics in the next 45 minutes. So there's a lot for everyone listening in. Different areas of interest were expressed by our audience before this, and we've worked them in. So we're going to start off with the role of AI in net zero and nature positive, a bit of an overview. We're going to then dive straight into practical applications of AI in sustainability. We're then going to talk about how we can leverage AI more broadly for environmental outcomes, the view from the cloud. We're going to talk about multi-stakeholder partnerships for AI and sustainability. And finally, we're going to talk about considerations for a global AI-centric sustainability roadmap. And that's a lot to go through, but fortunately, I'm joined by an absolutely stunning panel of speakers. I don't know how we managed to put them together, but we're going to break it all down with this. And first up, I'm very pleased to introduce Valentin Golovchenko, who is the lead for climate technology at the World Economic Forum. So Valentin leads this work within the Forum's Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. He drives initiatives on technology for climate adaptation, Earth observation data, essentially exploring a lot of impactful technologies that are going to help us get to net zero and nature positive. And before joining the Forum, he was in the aerospace industry, both as a consultant and an industrial engineer. And he focused a fair bit on innovation in logistics, supply chain, digital transformation. Valentin, welcome. And very, very big thanks for joining us on short notice. I think you're on mute, mate. There we go.
Thanks for having me, Shirin, and really happy to be here today.
Fantastic, thanks. All right, next up, we have Ayush Garg, who is product director at Unravel Carbon, which is an exciting startup that is championing the use of AI in decarbonization. And Ayush himself is an experienced product manager. He spent 1.5 years leading product development at Neom and nearly 4 years in a very similar role in that at Grab in Singapore. And he's also worked at JP Morgan and Deloitte in previous roles. Ayush, thank you for joining us. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people are going to want to reach out to you after this session. Welcome.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Next, we have Akira Yoshida, who is the AI policy lead for North Asia at Amazon Web Services. And Akira joined AWS in April 2020, where he's basically been managing the policy liaison on cloud computing, AI, competition policy, and sustainability. In a previous life, he was with the Cabinet Office in Japan for over a decade, where he worked on economic and fiscal policy. And more recently, before he was at AWS, he was with the OECD in Paris. And special thanks to Akira for joining us on his Thanksgiving holiday. We really hope that we're worth all the trouble, Akira.
It's a great pleasure to be part of this panel. Thanks.
Fabulous. And finally, we have Craig Melson, who is the Associate Director for Climate, Environment and Sustainability at Tech UK. And Tech UK is an industry association for the tech sector in, of course, the UK. Craig leads the Tech UK's work in each of these areas, ranging from climate change, ESG disclosures, and due diligence through to the circular economy, business and human rights, conflict minerals, and post-Brexit regulation. Craig, thanks for joining us, especially as you're the panelist with our earliest start for the day.
That's okay. Nice to see everyone, and I look forward to the discussion.
Fabulous. Now, straight to theme one. And for each of our themes today, we have one champion. And our champion for the first theme, which is the role of AI in our net zero future more broadly, is Valentin from the World Economic Forum. And before we start every one of these topics, we're going to start with the key statistic. And the key statistic for this topic is that global emissions overall need to fall by 43% by 2030 from 2025 levels, and 84% by 2050 if we are to meet the Paris objectives by the end of the century. And this was based on the IPCC's sixth assessment report released last year, which we covered in our Sustainability Conversation series, which you can find on the Access Partnership website. So Valentin, let's look at this topic, AI first. We know that AI is going to create a lot of value for our society, improving productivity. But in terms of interest or opportunity as a value, where do the applications of AI in sustainability rank versus their other applications?
Thanks for the question. So first, I would say that right now, what we're witnessing at the World Economic Forum is a strong focus on 3 themes. First is industry applications and potentially the transformative impact of AI technology on jobs. The second one being on governance and regulation of AI technology. and the third one on trust in and safety of these AI systems. So you can see that I haven't mentioned sustainability, but I think the reason for that is that ChatGPT, I think, has brought AI into the mainstream this year. And most people are still thinking about AI as large language models when they think about it. And that needs to change to some extent. So, of course, there are some global initiatives, especially from international organizations and the private sector, which are focused on, I would say, AI for good at large and accelerating progress towards the SDGs. Two examples come to mind. The International Telecommunication Unions has an AI for Good summit next May. Google, for example, also has an AI for Social Good research group. But today, what we're seeing is these efforts for us remain a bit sporadic. And the critical role of AI, because it is critical to support sustainability, can be overlooked. So I think that's why actually this conversation is important today, because we really need to raise awareness on the role of AI to support sustainability, because it is important and is actually quite uniquely suited to address these issues, environmental issues that we're facing across a broad range of applications.
Fantastic. Thanks for putting it in that context. And yes, it's very, very real. The fact that everyone just thinks of ChatGPT as the be all and end all of AI, but as we know, it's a lot more than that. And I'm glad you also sort of said that we need a bit more focus on what the sort of role of AI is at a global level. And maybe to set that conversation up, let's think about this sustainability first. And maybe let's put it in as stark terms as possible. Do you think net zero and nature positive is possible without AI, given the sheer speed of decarbonization that we need? In other words, is AI where we should be pinning our climate hopes?
So that's quite a provocative question, if I can say. First of all, the thing I want to say is that technology alone is not going to solve the climate crisis, and AI alone, even less so. So we need all components of society to work together, and actually we need to embrace a broad range of approaches, regulatory approaches, market, or even community-based. That being said, what's great about technology is that it can help support all these approaches. So we may be able, to your question, we may be able to reach net zero without technology, but it's just going to be a lot easier to do it with it. If that's okay, I will talk to the role of technology at large first, and then just deep dive on the specific role of AI within the technology ecosystem. So when we look at technologies for climate, so we have some that can replace existing carbon-intensive energy sources with cleaner alternatives like renewables, electric vehicles, for example. We have others that help us reduce emissions of activities which are still generating CO2. I'm thinking carbon capture and storage, for example, sustainable aviation fuels. And then we have another group that can help us better understand our environment and the impacts that climate change has on it, like Earth observation data, for example, or IoT. AI is quite unique because it has uses of its own, but it also works best when combined with other technologies that I mentioned, which also means that it has the broadest range of applications, and we will discuss some of them later, and the highest potential for impact at scale.
Gotcha. That's a very interesting way of framing it. Maybe let's get into some of the applications specifically. Let's try and make this as tangible as possible for our audience. So maybe top 3, top 5 applications of AI that you've seen, perhaps with commercial scale or potential in the future, and maybe if you can, some of the applications that you think our audience could directly use.
Sure. So as I mentioned, it has a broad range of applications, both public, private, also for civil society. I see 3 main fields of applications, and in each of these fields there are a few use cases, so I'll speak to them as well. All these cases for me are important because they will of course improve over time. But the technology in most of them is mature enough that businesses and organizations can get started with them today, actually, which is great, because it's not the case for other types of technologies sometimes. So the first field of application is what I call direct climate mitigation, which is how do we reduce the emissions that our economies generate by essence to slow down and eventually limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, as per the Paris Agreement that you mentioned. So in the mitigation space, AI is all about optimization. Which is how do you generate more or the same value, at least, using less resources. So a few examples to bring that to life. First, on the energy supply side. So AI can be used to, for example, analyze weather patterns and maximize outputs from renewable sources, thinking solar panels, windmills. It can also power, for example, smart grids that allow to better match supply and demand and optimize energy generation. Then on the energy demand side, it can also help with energy consumption, optimization of energy consumption. And that is for a broad range of industries. I'm thinking energy efficient smart buildings, for example, dynamic traffic monitoring to reduce congestion and pollution. And also in transportation, again, like route optimization for air and sea transportation to reduce fuel consumption. And third, and that one not only helps with climate change, but also helps preserve biodiversity. If you couple AI with real-time of Earth observation data, it can also enable precision agriculture. And that reduces the need for fertilizers, pesticides, water, and it maximizes the output in food, while also minimizing the carbon footprint of agricultural operations. So that's for mitigation. Then unfortunately, even with the best mitigation strategies, we're going to see more and more adverse effects of climate change in the years to come. The good news is that AI can also support climate adaptation, which is about managing the effects of climate change. And it can do that in a few ways. So first, to have an adaptation strategy, you need to understand the risks and the opportunities linked to climate change in your area. To be able to adapt, we need to better understand them, and AI can help us make sense of that. For example, it can make sense of large data sets provided by Earth observation data, drones, and turn them into actionable insights. So we've seen in recent days, actually, I don't know if you saw that, GraphCast from Google DeepMind actually outperformed legacy climate models for some specific conditions. But still, that's a great opportunity for us to actually build more tailored, specific climate models to inform local authorities and businesses on the risks they are facing. Second, it can also help build resilience against climate impacts. So once we're aware of the risk, if we couple AI models, for example, with real-time Earth observation data, we can feed them into early warning systems to limit loss of life and infrastructure during extreme weather events. That, on the business side, that can also inform supply chain management systems, for example, and limit disruptions when specific regions are hit. And then the third thing is, unfortunately, being aware of risk and having prepared for it is good, but disaster eventually hits. And when extreme events do happen, AI can be a crucial ally for the authorities in their response. It can provide recommendations for optimized resource allocation and reduce, for example, traffic congestion during evacuations. So we've talked to adaptation, mitigation, and all that is great. But in order to have adaptation and mitigation strategies, you need first to be able to accurately measure where you're at today and where you want to be tomorrow. And that's also where AI has a critical role to play in carbon measurement and reporting. And I know we'll be talking more about later today. It's actually a great field of application because it does support both mitigation and adaptation, in that it allows businesses to better understand and communicate their contribution to global emissions and prioritize their strategies accordingly. So just an example on that, and I know we'll hear more about it, but you can use AI-powered software to aggregate information from various data sources and track emissions throughout the entire value chains of businesses. And that allows businesses to calculate, for example, product carbon footprints that they can then use as part of their advertisement strategies, actually. Also allows them to comply with upcoming regulation. I'm thinking in Europe in particular, this will become mandatory in years to come, and also better target opportunities to decarbonize.
Fantastic. Thank you, Valentin. That's a very interesting framework that you've put up there. I know adaptation and mitigation is something that a lot of us who are sort of fluent in sustainability lingo are familiar with, but I like the way you really brought that out in some of the examples that you gave there. And we're going to pivot to our second topic now, which is, again, a very practical application of AI in sustainability. And Ayush is the champion of this topic. And maybe one stat to start off this session. And Valentin had mentioned what you don't measure, you don't value. Well, in 2020, we measured what the value of 4IR technologies in the nature positive economy could be. And we found out that for IR technologies, essentially those with artificial intelligence at their core, drive 87% of the value of the nature positive economy. That's $8.7 trillion in annual business value by 2030. And that was featured in our piece with the World Economic Forum on the future of nature and business. Ayush, let's dive right into your application. Could you explain a little bit more about Unravel Carbon's product and how it leverages AI?
Yeah, sure. So I think Valentine touched on the last application. Our focus on measuring emissions using AI. So we have built a SaaS platform, which is for both enterprises and SMEs. We help them collect data sources, primarily accounting data, get that to the system, use AI to take that unstructured item description, match that to a database of extensive item descriptions and emission factors. And what we give to the users is the overall emissions, corporate emissions view on a single dashboard. So typically, in the past, without these softwares, companies would spend months getting these emissions. And what we are trying to do using AI is to get that to a few days of data prep and getting the results. Our goal, I guess, as a company and as the product is to take time away from measuring, make that automated, so that teams can actually focus on the more important things, which is decarbonizing and how to do that. And AI is the key part of it, right? So when data comes in, it's utilities data, it's accounting data, it's your HR data about how people are coming to office. We take that, use AI to structure that data to predict and detect the item categories and actually match that to the huge database that we have using natural language processing. So AI is a big proponent of how this works.
Fantastic. So basically, if I, say at Access Partnership, want to understand what our emissions profile is, I could just basically explain a few things about what my company does, and basically that's what we would get back, right? What sort of emissions and costs we have.
Right, so that's one. And two, we would actually try to look at your purchases, right? So things that Access Partnership is purchasing. We focus on scope 3 particularly, scope 1 and scope 2, which is operational. People have good ways to measure that. Scope 3, which make up large portions of people's emissions, is what's difficult to measure. And we're trying to make that easy. So we'd actually look at your accounting data, what you've been purchasing, convert that into emissions, and it will be a reflection of not just your company, but your supply chain as well. And I think that's what's important and missing today.
Fantastic. And I know you guys are, pretty, relatively new faces in this space, but what sort of benefits have your clients specifically, gained in terms of, say, emissions reduction using your platforms and actually even similar platforms over time, right? What have you seen out there?
Yeah, I can give a few examples. So in terms of emissions, I guess one thing that we're able to do, which wasn't possible before, is to look at things in a more granular way. What that means is typically I would look at spend-based data, take a global average emission factor, and get a general emission sense. But at scale, using AI, I can actually differentiate emissions for a t-shirt manufactured in Jakarta, which is 30% cotton, 70% polyester, versus a different material composition at scale, because we're taking all the data and giving you exact emissions. So this makes things more actionable. Now, if companies are making small changes and just using global averages, they can't track the reduction. And if you can't track the reduction, the motivation is lost. So our goal is to make things granular easily so that you could actually track and see progress on a regular basis. In terms of actual impact, we work with a food retailer, which is popular in Singapore. They opened a net zero store recently, and we were doing the measurement for the materials going into the store to prove that this is actually the right use case to build that net zero store. One more point on cost, though. We do have a client who happens to be one of the largest global fashion retailers, and they've been working with us for 1 year. And what's interesting is they told us they used to have 5 analysts who used to have a full-time job of just measuring emissions. Now with us, after 1 year, it's just one analyst, and the other 4 people are focusing purely on decarbonizing. And that's the main power that we're trying to create for our customers.
Fantastic. That's a fantastic story right there, right? Like this is the power of AI. It improves productivity in so many different ways that it can even just free up time for people to think about, the real decarbonization job ahead of them. And look, a lot of our audience will probably have concerns about reporting in the future, right? A lot of them are going to be on the sort of ticket to report within the next 2 to 3 years. How does this data help them, with reporting? Not specifically, say, the data that you guys produce, but say carbon accounting data in general. What sort of role does software like yours have to play in that picture?
It's a big role. So I think we know ISSB has been getting popular. Carbon emissions have to be reported more vastly, and these softwares essentially helping get those data with, I guess, clear confidence and credibility for these reports easily. I think AI in general is also not just helping getting this data out, but also just creating initial drafts using generative AI to get the drafts in. I think the focus is where companies should be spending time on figuring out the climate risk and how they're planning the risk mitigation policies, and focus on that part in the reports, and let the softwares help fill in the initial data inputs such as these metrics using softwares.
Gotcha. That's helpful. And maybe one last question I'll ask is like, are there any particular barriers you see to how you think this use case might grow over time? Right. This is clearly a really powerful use case. You basically leveraging the computing power and intelligence of AI to effectively do your carbon accounting for you. Why wouldn't someone want to pick this up?
I guess there are concerns in the market, right? People do not trust the numbers. The numbers change. I think one thing that we believe, and we put that in practice, and we see other players doing that too, is that we don't want this to be a black box. People are scared that they put a number or input on day one, the answer is different from what they put on day two. What we want to do is keep it completely transparent. So anytime AI is used, you should be able to trace back and have an audit trail of what was exactly used. Second, there is essentially a team of human experts, right? Sustainability experts who actually review the output before they're used for reports. I don't think, have reached a place where it could just be put the input into the black box, get the output, and that's done. There is a need to make it an iterative process, and that's what we do at our company as well.
Gotcha. And that's actually a very important point on AI, in general. A lot of the sort of complementary skills for using AI are around, critical thinking, around problem solving, around being the sort of guardrail against what it could potentially do on the negative end. But this was really fantastic, right? Like we've gotten now a very clear, tangible sort of example in front of us on how AI can power sustainable outcomes. And maybe let's move on to the next topic here, which is leveraging AI more broadly in net zero applications. And this is going to be championed by Akira. And look, the stat I think that would be most helpful here is in sort of relation to the point that AI leverages a huge amount of data to power some of these sustainable outcomes, right? And that requires computing abilities. And hyperscale cloud facilities, we know, basically can reduce carbon footprint quite significantly. Say, in comparison to on-premise data centers in Asia Pacific, there was a study that AWS did with us a while back, which found out that this could be reduced by at least 78% if you move computing loads from on-premise data centers to hyperscale cloud centers. So, Akira, maybe let me start with one pretty simple question. From your vantage point, what sort of benefits has the cloud brought to the adoption of AI in net zero applications?
Sure. I actually believe that cloud computing will play an essential role in promoting AI for sustainability. I want to make 2 points here. Firstly, cloud democratizes access to IT resources, which are critical for AI development and deployment, including for sustainability. Secondly, a cloud offers the most energy efficient environment for running AI workloads, as Shiv mentioned. And I think this is a key to take a balance between, on the one hand, promoting AI adoption, and on the other hand, achieving the net carbon zero goal or Paris Agreement. Let me dive deep into these 2 points. In the first place, to maximize the potential of AI for sustainability, people need access to IT resources such as compute, storage, and data analytics. And cloud is actually going to be a key to democratizing access to AI because cloud offers these resources for anyone, any company of any size. So it's very important that people have access to resources with the cloud. And I believe this is the only way we can truly take advantage of AI. In addition, as the world uses AI more, we are going to need access to more data, more compute, and more storage. So we need to do so in a sustainable way. So the question is how quickly we can learn and adapt and scale AI. So that's the key question because we need to achieve the Paris Agreement goal anyway. This is why it's important that AI is run in the cheap, cleanest, and most energy efficient environment, which is cloud, I believe. As Shipping briefly introduced, 451 research suggests that AWS infrastructure is five times more energy efficient than the average data centers, on-premise data centers. And it also found that moving from on-premise data centers to the AWS cloud could reduce energy consumption and associated carbon emission by 80%. Also, cloud computing is more energy efficient than on-premise data centers because the customer can provision the resources in a very flexible way. They just provision what they need instead of provisioning resources at the peak level, which traditional data centers usually do. So that's why I believe that cloud is a key to ensure the sustainability of AI itself. I want to add one more thing, which is our efforts at the server or chip level. AWS is investing in our own chips to ensure that AI training or inferencing can be done in a sustainable way. One example is our own chip for AI training, which is called AWS Trainium. This purpose-built chip for AI training can reduce the cost of training up to 62% and also reduce the energy consumption by 30%. So these are the efforts that we as AWS are making to ensure that AI workloads are run in a sustainable way.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Akira. I think that's a really clear way of sort of bringing the synergies between cloud and AI to the fore. And I'm probably now going to ask you the most uncomfortable question of today's panel, which is that we know that that using AI requires more cloud computing capabilities, and hyperscale might be the most efficient way to do it, but it still might mean greater energy demand from the facilities that support AI. So are we solving one problem, which is making some of our processes more efficient using AI, and thereby using less resources, and creating another problem by having additional demand for cloud services and cloud computing? If yes, how do we solve that challenge? And maybe I would suppose a related question to that is, whom would you like to work together with to solve those challenges?
Sure. Again, I believe that cloud and AI are key tools to achieve our sustainability efforts, for sure. There are actually a number of companies and nonprofit organizations using AI and machine learning powered solutions on AWS cloud to tackle issues related to sustainability. The example include running energy grids on the cloud or optimizing flight paths to reduce the energy use, or minimizing emission from transportation and digitizing agriculture with AI solutions on the cloud. So there are so many examples that cloud accelerates AI use for sustainability. As you rightly mentioned, the challenge is that we need to ensure we run AI workloads on the emissions-free energy, which is renewable energy. For that, it is very important to remove blockers to increase availability of renewable energy. At Amazon, we are on the path to powering its operations with 100% renewable energy by 2025, which is 5 years ahead of our initial target of 2030. And as part of our effort, we are procuring renewable energies across the world, including APAC, including Japan, Singapore, China, and recently India. So using renewable energy at the cloud data center is very important to mitigate the environmental concerns on the AI. I must say, as a policy person, there are a number of opportunities for private companies and government to work together to increase renewable energy use. Because we face challenges in increasing the renewable energy use in APAC region because of limited availability or undue regulatory complexity and high costs of renewable energy. I think this is the area we, as private sector can make more efforts. Actually, Amazon is working with local industry groups in India, Japan, and Indonesia to expand renewable energy use. But that's not enough, I have to say. We need to bring the efforts with the government to expand more.
I like that. And if I could just probe you one quick time on what specifically you would like governments to help do in terms of reducing barriers to renewable energy, that would be some really helpful context. And maybe think about it generally, because a lot of our audience comes from Europe, the UK, Africa, Asia, the Pacific. We have a variety of different challenges in different places. But in general, what do you think the role of the public sector is in solving that challenge?
Sure. Let me share an example of Japan. We face challenges in procuring renewable energy because there is a very strict requirements in the land use for solar panel projects. Like, for example, if we want to use the agricultural land for renewable energy project, we face a number of challenges because there are permitting issues and a very lengthy administrative process for using the agricultural land for such projects. So that's one example. I mean, there are a number of regulatory requirements and complexity around the renewable energy use, I must say.
Gotcha. Okay. I was just actually looking at some of the questions coming in, and there's a few interesting ones that we've got in the back here. But I'm going to press ahead with a couple of the topics that we have, and then we're going to get to it. So folks, keep your questions coming in. let's pivot slightly now. Akira, thank you so much for the thoughts on sort of where different actors can come in. And Craig, this is sort of where I'd like to bring you in.
Oh, I've got
On
a purple.
these. Well,
Not sure what happened to that.
fantastic.
That's
We'll
brilliant.
figure it out. We'll figure it out in the back end. Yeah. So look, we'll talk to you a bit now about these multi-stakeholder partnerships, right? So before maybe we go in, this is a stat from our survey that we had put on LinkedIn before this, which was how many of our community respondents would be willing to join a public-private forum on advancing AI for sustainability. Fantastic results there. Over 80% said they would. 12% said they want to know a little bit more. They're a bit uncertain. And only about 5% said no. So let me put this sort of question to you now. What do you think are the benefits of government and industry working together at this sort of AI and sustainability nexus? And what do you think are the challenges that need to be solved?
Well, as a guy who's purple, I think the key word is understanding. So if you're a tech organization or if you're a government, you kind of want to understand what motivates each other, what pressures and drivers you're facing. So it's kind of stopping badly designed policy. I think that's a really important bit. So if you've got a policy that hasn't been inputted by the sort of technology providers, it's going to be badly fitting or just not really in keeping with actually the realities of the technology. Equally, if the technologists are allowed kind of blank checks and free reign, they're going to rub up against policy pretty quickly. So it's about kind of understanding, especially for something emerging and transformative like AI. It's really important to have those dialogues as early as possible in the development process, keeping each other kind of engaged and understood throughout. I think that's the key benefit of such partnerships. I mean, we see this all the time with what Tech UK does. Even just simple things like being able to just translate what is a foundation model, what is a large language model, how does Gen AI distinguish between this or that input. So just being able to go and speak to the government and just sort of walk them through some of this stuff. And equally as well, it's about kind of understanding the barriers as well. Every government wants to be really sexy with AI and kind of be the best for deployment, but actually it might be that these sectors that need it, whether it was what was discussed around the energy transition, whether it's around green software, whether it's around decarbonisation of industries, how can we kind of help overcome those barriers from a sort of regulatory policy perspective to promote that adoption, whether that's business, finance, whether that's culture, whether that's conflicting regulations. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thanks. And maybe let me ask you if you could pinpoint in this specific intersection, AI and sustainability, what are one or two regulatory challenges, through your work and your experience that you've seen that need solving?
So one is the digital infrastructure required to actually enable AI models. So data center deployments. In the UK, I don't know what the situation is in other places, but in the UK, it can take 10, 15, 20 years to get a data center from planning permission to being built and then to get an energy connection. Literally, you can build a data center, but you might not get an energy grid connection until 2035, 2040 sometime. So we're really glad that the UK government has recognised this and looking to fix it. So that's a really, really interesting one. That kind of barrier around decarbonisation, how can we deploy AI for any purpose, including sustainability, if we aren't able to actually get the connectivity there? The second one is really understanding the energy inputs. So discussions we have with regulators and with government have all these assumptions around AI as being a kind of big energy sapping vampire. And just kind of translating that as, well, actually, yeah, there may be a short-term energy penalty, but it's going to deliver long-term energy efficiency and therefore carbon emissions. And how do you kind of get policymakers to accept a kind of almost a short-term blip in the technology deployment and then actually let that go? because you're enabling that over time. So that, I guess, it's the rebound effect stuff. So how do you actually do that from a policy perspective? The other is about the other one's around kind of skills as well. So lots of places are really struggling with skills and with the fundamental ability to actually use AI. There's also fear around kind of just transition and fear around job losses. Kind of working with people to sort of not use these big discussions we're having around skills and job to actually translate that into something that's an aid to people rather than barrier. Yeah, so that's some of the big fundamentals. I've got all day when I talk about all the very micro specifics around how government procures systems and the diminishing use of PUE as a metric and scope 3 reporting, but yeah, we haven't got all day. So.
That's fantastic context. I think that's really clear. And maybe if I could ask you in 1 minute, because I do want to get to some of these questions as well. Is there any clear example from the Tech UK experience of a partnership between government and private sector or associations, even if it's just one program, on AI that you would maybe think could be applicable across regions? Again, thinking about the fact that we've got people from all over the world on this session.
So I think the International Centre for Climate and AI has been really, really well supported. So this is a UK initiative, but it's got people buy-in from governments and from technologists from all over the world in all regions, and it's kind of looking at really trying to understand and get those problem statements for where AI can make the biggest impact on climate change, whether that's through adaptation and resilience, whether that's through mitigation by delivering process efficiency in heavy emitting sectors. I think that's been a really, really, really strong one. We're also very supportive what Valentine's doing with WEF as well, being able to kind of quantify that. Like WEF have got a great stat that 20% of emission reduction can be delivered through digital technologies. So kind of translating that one. But a non-AI one that I think is a really good model but it can be applied for AI is Tech Against Trafficking. So this is a multi-sector initiative between technology companies, law enforcement, the civil society and governments coming together to look at this specific issue around how can technology be deployed to prevent human trafficking. And we don't really care if it's AI. There's plenty of AI tools going through the accelerator being looked at. But it's also looking at blockchain, IoT. It's also looking at victim support technologies from digital identity verification. So it's very problem driven rather than technology driven. I think we've seen this before with AI discussions. Let's just use AI to solve the problem rather than look at the problem and see how AI can feed into solving it with other things.
That's fantastic, Craig. I really like the way you frame that. Think about it problem first, and then figure out how AI is part of the solution. That's, that very nicely. I don't even need a segue anymore. That very nicely gets us into the last formal bit of the discussion, which is, what considerations do we need to think about for an AI-centric sustainable development roadmap? And I'm going to throw it to each of our panelists for about 60 to 90 seconds each. And I'd love for you to answer 3 questions as briefly as you can. So first is, what do you think is the main opportunity at the AI and sustainability nexus? Second, what do you think is the top problem you would want to solve on this? And third, just because we wrote a paper on COP28 that I don't think anyone at the conference has bothered reading, even though it's fantastic. Thanks, Luca. I want to know if you guys have any hopes from COP28 on solving this particular challenge. So maybe, Valentine, let me throw it over to you first. I know these are lots of questions, but as quickly as you can.
Very briefly answer your last question first. I think conversations can start at COP28. I'm not sure this COP will actually solve the problem, but it's definitely a good place to bring stakeholders together and have that conversation, or at least get it started. On the other questions, I think the major opportunities for me is really highlighting that role that AI can play in sustainability strategies, as I mentioned earlier. And we need to make that more clear to decision makers around the world, in the private sector, in the public sector. I would just spend a bit more time on challenges because I think it's something really important and I want to mention it. Climate change is by essence a global problem. So we need global solutions for that. And a key driver of that is to make sure that AI technology, which has so much potential, can be developed, accessed, and applied with inclusivity, sustainability, and equity at its core. And that means that on development, for example, we need to promote the use of inclusive AI development. And that means increasing the share of training data originating in the global south, for example, which is not the case today, to make sure that the models we develop are actually applicable in the global south as well as in the north. On access, it also means we need to make sure this technology is provided to underserved areas because they're often the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change as well. And we need to make sure the educational resources and expertise are also flowing that way. And finally, on our applications, as much as we can, we need to highlight and we need to inspire replication of applications of AI that support people and planet goals. There's plenty of applications around, but if we can align business objectives with sustainability objectives as much as possible, that's definitely going to have an impact. I hope that was 90 seconds.
As close as you could get. Thanks, Valentin. Ayush, over to you.
Sure. Well, I think I'll address the first one. So I think on the nexus, right? So I think everyone wants sustainability. That most people, most companies wants to think about it. The barrier really comes on cost and effort, right? That's what stops people from really going for it. And I think that's where AI comes in. AI is not to be used directly. The job of AI is to remove those barriers of cost and effort for people to actually act on sustainability, something they're already thinking about. And I think the second main point is this is where the technology companies come in, right? I think just using AI directly by people who think about sustainability, that's not going to happen. That's not where people's expertise lie. And that's where tech companies have to come in, mask the AI behind into something that's easy to understand, easy to apply, and remove those barriers of cost and effort. So I think that's the main thing that we as tech companies around the world have to focus on to move the needle forward. In terms of COP28, I think like Valentine said, I think it's a conversation starter. It's not where things get solved. I think once there are more and more use cases of the how, and that's more visible, then we could hope for future conferences to speak about policies of and actual policies of applying those how to solve issues. So I know there are a lot of companies, including us, who will be there at COP28 speaking about it, but I think it's just a conversation starter there for now.
Fantastic. I really like the way you put it as reducing cost. That's a soundbite right there. Well done. Akira, let me throw it over to you next.
Sure. I already highlighted the opportunity of AI for sustainability and the role of cloud. So let me dive deep into the second point, which is the challenges we need to address. I think the success of AI relies on humans and the investments to upskill people. This is something Craig mentioned already. And we believe that people need to be trained to maximize the potential of AI. That's why we at Amazon is committed by 2025 that we train 29 million people across the world with free access to cloud training. And this training includes machine learning education. So the upskilling people is a very important and crucial challenge we are facing. And I think companies have a role to play. And secondly, since cloud brings a lot of benefits for AI adoption, for sustainability for sure, we encourage policymakers to prioritize cloud first and cloud native and cloud migration policies because cloud brings environment benefits for AI adoption. That's it for me.
Fabulous. Thanks, Akira. I like that point. Cloud first policies. That's the way to go for sure. Craig, over to you. Your thoughts, please. Craig, I think you might be on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I've been doing that to make sure the others come across clearly. I think the biggest opportunity is unearthing hidden emissions. I think with all this scope-free disclosure regulation coming in, people think, I think AI's got a huge. I think everyone's going for a bit of a shock that their targets are going to become a lot harder to meet in the next year or two, because AI is going to unearth all sorts of patterns and all sorts of supply chain partners that they've never looked at in terms of calculating something. Unearthing hidden emissions, getting the true picture, is a huge opportunity. Even if it makes uncomfortable reading or for many organisations. We saw this in use of the example from another area. So, Greater Manchester Police in the UK used an AI tool to try and unearth modern slavery premises, where areas we think modern slavery is. And what it did is, it was like, oh my God, there's loads of it all around where we thought we didn't know about this. So I think that's going to happen with emissions, and therefore you can address it. The old adage, you can't fix what you can't measure, will apply. Problem fix, I think process emissions, process efficiency in heavy emitting sectors is probably the biggest opportunity. So optimizing steel, construction, energy grids, power sector, transport. There's huge opportunities there to just really make them as lean as possible. I think my hope for 28 is I think there's a lot of discussion. We're actually running a round table, and anyone is, we have spaces if anyone would like to participate on this in Dubai on the use of AI for resilience and adaptation. So how can AI really be deployed for that? And I think there's going to be a lot of discussion around using innovative digital tech to address climate change that's already here. I think that's what I'm really hopeful for COP28.
Fantastic. Thank you, Craig. And also your point on the International Center for Climate and AI, I think was very well received. These are excellent forums to sort of kickstart the conversation. So thank you everyone for that. And with only 4 minutes left, I have about 6 questions here, and I'm going to pick the top 2. And I think, Valentine, the first question goes to you. I quite like the way this person has framed it. They've said, can AI help solve prickly challenges in sustainability, such as in verifying additionality and transparency of carbon credits? I think this might have come from the news that Vera released their new methodology to use AI more broadly. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it also depends how you train your AI models, and you need to have the right type of data in order for AI to be considered as a trustable way of verifying that information. But absolutely, if you get the right data, it's definitely one of the applications.
Okay. I think the second half of this question, which I didn't mention just yet, was, is there potential for AI to exacerbate the crisis of confidence in carbon credits?
That similarly, yes, absolutely. It all depends how much trust we can place in these AI models. If the trust is there, then it's a great way to actually verify carbon credits. If the trust isn't there, then absolutely it's going to make it worse. So what we need to focus on right now is making sure that we can build that trust in AI models, and that comes from various things, using, as I said, the right training data, making it transparent, and trying as much as we can to verify the provenance of training data when we actually ask AI to do some tasks.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Maybe let's move to the next question. Ayush, this one was directed towards you. What advice would you give MSMEs who are looking to leverage AI-based tools for reporting and decarbonization? Most of the tools I have available to me are way outside my budget. Interesting.
Yeah, sure. I guess first is there are a lot of tools across multiple price ranges, and I'm happy that's a question. In my experience, a lot of SMEs who step away from it thinking it's too complicated and we don't want to try. So I think we are exploring a tool as well. So our typical tool has different price points. We're exploring a very low price tool for SMEs too. There are a few tools coming out for different sectors, some free tools coming from governments. I think they are a good start. I think if you are an SME, you don't have to focus on getting the most granular emissions and the most accurate emissions. I think we can think of emissions as a journey. The idea is to start somewhere, no matter how sophisticated it is, get a number, and then build a plan around measuring it. So I think there is tools. I'm happy to talk separately as well to whoever asked the question.
Thanks for that. And look, that's I think that's a neat way of sort of ending this. I know there's a few questions, but we're almost at time, and I do want to make sure that everyone in this part of the world at least gets to enjoy their evening. So let me just end off by saying, to all of our panelists, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for your perspectives. I think this is an excellent way to start the conversation. Maybe let's close off with the 4 main takeaways that I have from all of you. The first, I think, came from Craig, which is whenever we think about applying AI in sustainability, think about the problem first and not about how AI works its way into the picture before you figure out what the problem is. The second is from Ayush, which was, AI's important, perhaps main role is that it can improve your productivity. It can reduce the time and cost you need to actually get sustainable. The third was from Akira, which was one of the main sort of things to solve in this nexus is how do we make renewables a greater part of the picture, particularly because cloud and AI are so inextricably interlinked, and they are together what's going to help us solve all of these challenges. And the final takeaway for me was from Valentin, which was this important part on risks and safety. Look, we've got to make this inclusive. We've got to make the data that we train this on unbiased. We've got to make everyone believe that AI is actually working for us and not against us, without which none of these applications will really see their full potential. So with that, thank you to everyone for joining. We've really had a fantastic and engaged audience. So all of you at home, at work, thank you so much for joining. And let's close off here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.